Welcome back to the Convo Couch, everyone. I am Pasta Jardula.
I'm Fiorella.
And Jonny Sue is still spinning on the ones and twos. And today on the show, we have a great guest. We have the commissioner on the Tacoma Area Commission on Disabilities and an activist with the Tacoma Tenants Organizing Committee. She is a graduate of Johns Hopkins, and she is running as a Democrat for Congress in Washington, District 6. From the brand new Congress, we have Rebecca Parson, singular,
Hi.
in the house.
Yeah, singular. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Thank you for being here. I know you're running around and you're busy as a candidate, but this is, a very important year for everybody. Not only in the presidential elections, we have to remember that even if Bernie or a progressive wins this election, we need congressional people, we need senators, we need people who are going to be helping move this agenda forward. So thank you for being here. So we always start out with really easy questions here.
Yeah.
But just basically we want to get to know you. So why are you running for Congress? What inspired you? And why not start out with something more local like city council?
Yeah, both good questions. And the reason that I'm running for Congress is because my district is interesting. We have the city of Tacoma, but we also have rural areas. Parts of the district are very different from each other. But as I've gone around the district and talked to people, I've noticed some common struggles that we have, especially with housing, addiction, homelessness, lack of education, environmental issues. And what we have in our representation has really failed us. We have a Democrat, the ninth most conservative Democrat in the House, who has calls himself a national leader on campaign finance reform and getting money out of politics, but he's taken $3 million from corporate PACs. And so the response that we get, some Democrats just can't be pushed no matter how much you try. I've tried, lots of local activists have tried, and the response we get from him and people like him is just, wow, gosh, I'm so sorry, how awful. We're really doing the best we can. But I think that they are really not doing the best they can. And we have, you mentioned I have an activist with the Tacoma Tenants Organizing Committee that formed out of a struggle when a local building, an out-of-town developer bought it, kicked everybody out, tripled the rents, and the people who were there were all low income. That was their last stop between being in a home and being homeless, and two of them have died since then.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of urgency that makes me really want to run so that I can fight for housing for all, Medicare for all, the Green New Deal. And I thought about starting with something else like city council, something like that. But with the issues we face, especially with the climate crisis, I don't think there's time to go that typical route where, you might start with the city council, state legislature, and work your way up. Because by the time I would have gone through that whole process, we would be past the 2030 climate deadline that we have. And nobody else was really stepping up to challenge and really run on these issues that we need to solve the climate crisis. So that's why I decided to run.
I think a lot of people really don't necessarily want to run for a Congress seat, but like you said, nobody steps up. And we understand you're fighting against the machine. We met a lot of your fellow candidates out there. We were just talking about Jason Call and whatnot, and there's a lot of great progressives running out there. But who do you see as an ally? We know who you're fighting against, because we learn about these Democrats in your state that are just awful, like what's his name? John Smith, the guy with Sarah Smith? Adam Smith, whatever. Another Smith. But, we learn about these candidates that are so, part of the establishment. Who do you see locally as an ally to your campaign?
Well, I really admire Pramila Jayapal. I haven't had personal contact with her, but she's a great progressive. She's a very strong progressive. I think she just came out endorsing Bernie Sanders. She's a co-chair of the Progressive Caucus in Congress. So she's really fighting for she's a strong progressive fighter fighting for what we need. Shama Swant is a socialist on the city council in Seattle. She's really good, strong, a firebrand. She's never afraid to go for what really needs to be done. She was one of the candidates in Seattle who Amazon tried to defeat.
Yeah.
And through her grassroots people-powered movement, they fought back and she was able to stay on city council. So it's people like that that really I look up to and who are strong allies in the progressive movement.
And as far as your opponent, you mentioned the PAC money. Is there anything else? What about the foreign policy, the military, Trump's military budgets, and the money? Where are they getting their money besides the PACs? What specific industries?
Yeah, he takes a lot of money from the defense industry, from companies that contract with ICE to provide services to aid in their separation of children removed from their families, moving them around the country, tracking them or failing to track them. He takes money from those people. He also takes money from pharmaceutical companies, including a particular pharmaceutical PAC that represents the pharmaceutical companies that are currently being sued for manufacturing the opioid crisis, which is severely impacting our district. I have the number 1 and number 2 counties in the entire state for opioid death rates.
Wow.
And he takes money from the people who caused that.
That about does it.
It's kind of crazy. We're from Florida too, so we understand. When it comes to the opioid addicted, it's a shame. And when I look at your platform on your line, and I see all the issues that progressives love, a Green New Deal, Medicare for all, criminal justice reform. I don't know if you've heard this, but I'm a civil liberties guy. And when you knock on a libertarian-minded door, you said there's almost 33% of your people are Republicans in your district. How do you convince them to vote for you?
One thing I've found that really resonates across the board, so for a lot of Republicans, for libertarians, for liberals, progressives, is getting money out of politics. They hate, almost everybody hates the amount of big money that's in politics. And many people just don't, first of all, many people don't know who their member of Congress is. And then secondly, even people who do know who their member of Congress is, they think, well, he's a Democrat and, I've seen him at town halls, he must be a good guy. And then when you tell him, well, yeah, he may be a good guy, like interpersonally, but here's where he's taken all the money, $3 million from corporate PACs. He voted to cut food stamps for 1.7 million people. He says one thing, he does another, and I can go step by step. He says this, does this, says this, does that for everything. And, 2 things that people really hate across the board is hypocrisy and taking corporate money instead of serving your constituents. And so that really resonates across the board. I've also been out canvassing in Aberdeen, which is in Grays Harbor County. That's where Kurt Cobain was from. And, homelessness has become a crisis recently, but in Grays Harbor, it's been a crisis for decades. And I was out canvassing there talking to people about the Green New Deal. And what we did was show them a list of progressive policies and said, which one of these would you like to be part of the Green New Deal or would be most important for you? Because we want to make sure that the Green New Deal benefits rural Washington and not just the cities. And they were things like a federal jobs guarantee, more union jobs, free childcare so that you can work, whether you're man or woman, mom, dad, whatever, so you can work and pursue your career. And even people who they volunteered, we didn't ask. They told us that they had voted for Trump. They said, well, I don't know. It's hard to say because I really like all these policies. And so I think when you go out and talk to people like that, it resonates. And Grays Harbor County went for Trump, and that was the first time the county had gone for a Republican in 90 years. So even in that area, these policies are popular. And on the Olympic Peninsula, which is a rural part of my district, a lot of people love FDR there, including Republicans.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like when you don't label things right away, when you just tell people human to human about the issues that they're facing, then they can relate. And I think that's something that you're dealing with, because I wanted to point out the homelessness crisis is huge in Los Angeles. Obviously, we're a very urban, metropolitan, big city, and we know it's a big deal in Seattle. But what exactly does it look like in more rural areas of Washington? Because it's a little bit different than, say, what we're looking at here in Los Angeles.
Yeah, and that's the first time I've been asked that question. That's a really good question. And I have, if anybody's watched my campaign ad, I have part of it is shot at a homeless encampment where I'm talking to people there. That's in Aberdeen. Aberdeen has a population of 16,000 and they have 1,000 homeless people. So when you have 1 in 16 homeless, there's a real societal problem. And a lot of the people at that camp where I filmed, it was in the town of Aberdeen, but they used to be, for years and years, they slept, they lived and camped by the river in Aberdeen. And the city pretty much just left them alone. And then all of a sudden they got a new mayor in. He decided he wanted to do something about it. He started putting up all these roadblocks. Like he enacted a fence around it and said anybody who wanted to go in needed a permit. They wouldn't let a woman who's native, she wanted to go in. People who were living there who are native wanted her to go in and smudge and do a ceremony with them. They wouldn't let her in. There was also an Episcopal priest who, people living there had requested to come in. They wouldn't let her in. So they successfully sued the city for violating their freedom of religion, and just lots of stuff like that they throw up. So One thing is, like in Seattle and Tacoma, we have more resources to fight these things. And I think in rural areas, they don't have as many resources. There aren't as many, civil rights lawyers. The ACLU may not have a chapter there. And so a lot of this stuff happens, and it takes a lot more effort to fight back. But in Aberdeen, the community has successfully. Then I was also recently talking to a social worker in a small town called Port Angeles in my district. And she works with she and the local police department have a successful partnership where they go out and do outreach to homeless people. And there, that's a rural area, and she goes out to where the homeless people are to talk to them about the services that are available. And that means that she actually goes out into the woods and finds people. And she's the only person in the county that does it. So when they wanted to do a point in time count, they're like, oh, we need to contact her because she knows where in the woods people are camping. And that's what it looks like in a rural area, like that one-to-one outreach. A lot of homeless people have a justifiable suspicion. I believe it's justifiable suspicion of people in whatever authority it may be.
Yeah.
Like if you come to them and you say, I'm a social worker, I want to help, or I'm a caseworker, or I'm from the city, or I'm a police officer, to many of them, it doesn't matter. You're all the same. You're from, the government, which they feel and many times has screwed them over before. And so it takes a lot of one-on-one connection. And she does that, puts on her hiking boots and goes out into the forest and finds people. So that's what it looks like in rural areas.
I was looking at your page, looking at your Twitter, researching you, getting ready for this interview, and I saw when it came to a lot of these issues that you were really, you're just another step above from your experience and everything you do, and what you're saying today is resonating so strongly too. Because it's just a serious problem when it comes to homelessness and everything. Mm-hmm. But let's get on to a little bit of foreign policy, because also as a congresswoman, you're going to have to make decisions that are going to affect us foreign policy wise. What is your opinion about the situation in Venezuela? Do you feel that Nicolas Maduro is a dictator or the rightful elected leader of Venezuela? And furthermore, what would you do about the sanctions that are being imposed on the people of Venezuela?
I don't believe sanctions are an effective way to enact our foreign policy, because it often just hurts the everyday people there who then cannot afford things. It drives up the prices for them. I think that the essentially coup that happened in Venezuela that was supported by us and by the administration was not the right way to go. We have a long history of this kind of thing in Latin America. When I was just out of college, I spent 5 months in Guatemala and Mexico. And I got interested in that because I took a course on genocide studies when I was in college. And then I worked with the International Association of Genocide Scholars for a couple of years. And Guatemala, many people are familiar maybe with the genocide in Rwanda, in Cambodia, but there was also a genocide in Guatemala.
Yeah.
And that happened during their 30-year civil war.
Mm-hmm.
The 30-year civil war started because we toppled their democratically elected leader. Mm-hmm. And then the government that took over massacred and committed genocide against the native Mayan population. And I went there because I wanted to learn Spanish, and I also wanted to learn more about it and just see firsthand. And it just has these ripple effects. And so, for example, then, it seems like every election season, Trump invents a new caravan that's supposedly coming.
Yeah.
But why are these people coming? Why are their countries unstable? It's partly because of our foreign policy and all the toppling of their leaders that we have done.
Exactly. And Donald Trump ran as a non-interventionist a populist, right? He sort of ran on to say, oh, we're going to drain the swamp. We're going to get out of these wars. But he obviously hasn't done that. His administration assassinated Qasem Soleimani in Iran. And then, we are now in a more precarious situation than we were before. So is Iran truly an enemy of the state? And how would you, as a congressperson, approach this issue in the Middle East?
I think it was a mistake to assassinate General Soleimani. I know that Trump has labeled their forces, a terrorist force, but I think that the people of Iran and the people of America are not enemies, and it doesn't, in terms of furthering diplomacy. And then just not even getting into the Iran deal that took so long to broker. The people of each country are not enemies, and I don't think it does any good to label the military of a foreign country a terrorist force if your goal is to have peaceful relations and to promote peaceful relations between the two countries and around the world. What is, just aside from the moral question, what is the practical thing to do? Is the practical thing to do to assassinate their top general and label them terrorists? No, I don't think so. And it's impractical, it's undiplomatic, and it doesn't further our interests.
Yeah, I think that when the Iranian National Guard, Revolutionary Guard, excuse me, I shouldn't say National Guard, Revolutionary Guard, when they labeled them a terrorist group back in April, and the Democrats sat by, it was just a stepping stone to see like, oh no, now they can do what they want because they're a terrorist group, and with the AUMF. What do you think about the AUMF? Would you call for the abolishment of that particular bill?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need to repeal it. And I think, as you said, it's a mistake. Democrats just let these things happen. Like my opponent, Derek Kilmer, he's taken so much defense money, and he voted to approve Trump's military budget without any of the restraints that progressives wanted in it. Yeah. So, Democrats like him, they vote to give Trump everything he wants, all the power he wants, and then when he uses the power they gave him, oh my God, oh, goodness gracious, oh my gosh, like, what did you think he was gonna do? Yeah. And then they give it all to him, and then they say, oh, we need to rein him in, oh, this is so terrible, how rude, that kind of thing, almost like the problem is a lack of civility. Yeah. If you don't want somebody to use power, you shouldn't give it to them.
Yeah. Right. I think you guys have a lot of Democrats in Washington. We keep, every single time we talk to you guys, it's like people think that California and Washington are so progressive, but we have these establishment Democrats that take money from the military industrial complex and from fracking companies and energy. It's just terrible. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to, on that note then, what is your opinion on the whole impeachment trial and what they are accusing Donald Trump of? Because they could have gone after him for other more strong reasons, but they chose to go after him for this whole Ukraine issue, the phone call. So what exactly, how do you think the Democratic Party is approaching impeachment?
I think they're approaching it in a very, very morally timid way, and that of all the things they could have gone after Trump for, they went after him for attacking a member of their establishment. Right. And yes, what he did with Ukraine was wrong, but there are many other things that he did that were wrong as well. And I do believe in upholding the Constitution as a principle in itself. My grandfather was he was retired as a colonel in the Army. He spent his entire decade there. And my father was a Foreign Service officer. Both of them took the same oath to the Constitution that a member of Congress takes. And I grew up overseas. Every 2 years when we'd visit on home leave, we'd visit my grandparents in Virginia. And my grandfather would talk to us about the Constitution and how important it was to him. And it is to me as well. And so I believe on principle that if a president violates the Constitution, then we need to hold them accountable. And so even if you accept the premise that, the days of have you no shame, sir, those days are gone. The Republicans, Mitch McConnell, et cetera, they do not seem to have shame. Even if you accept that and they're going to vote to protect him, let's say, we decide he violated the Constitution in XYZ ways. We're going to lay it all out there so the American people can see it. And even if the Republicans vote against it, at least it's a matter of public record. We've showed the country what he's done. Ripping children away from their parents at the border, the emoluments clause, Ukraine could be one of them. But for them to choose and do this kind of narrow impeachment focus, it really and it puts Democrats in a position as well of saying, well, what Biden and his son did may not have been, it may be a little iffy, but it's legal, well, yeah. Is that going to be our argument?
Right.
Yeah, I think the hypocrisy of the Democrats is why they're caught in this position. What about the situation when it comes to Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders? We know there's a lot of burners up there in Washington. How do you feel about that whole little mishmash they got into?
I think it was a very low blow of Elizabeth Warren, and then to do it so soon before the caucus and the primary. I also just find it very dubious that Bernie Sanders would have said that. Obviously, they were the only two people there in the conversation, so I guess none of us can ever really know. But given the fact that he's on video from the 80s saying that he thinks women can be president, I'm very skeptical of it. And I think it was, however it was leaked, whether it was just by a disgruntled staffer without her permission, who knows, but the way she responded to it was very low as well. And then the whole thing on stage after the debate where she comes up and says, I think you called me a liar. And, she knew that she was still mic'd and all of that. I just thought it was very low. And then aside from the ethical, questions there, also just strategically, it showed to me yet again that she has poor political instincts or the people around her do, because her brand is all like the folksy Oklahoma truth teller. And then she pulled this like very low move that made her look like a calculating politician. And he only rose in the polls after that and now has a much higher margin over her in the polls. So she just wounded herself.
Yeah, she did. She actually did progressives kind of a favor. She united them a little bit more against the establishment, cemented herself as the establishment. I would agree with you there. I want to kind of talk about the attack right now, because as of the last 48 hours, we're seeing Bernie Sanders rise in the polls, as you've said, but we're also seeing a multitude of attacks not only waged towards Bernie Sanders himself as a person and a candidate, but also waged towards his supporters and the progressive movement. You are being rude, you are shouting, you are chanting, you are, how dare you, have a protest against Medicare for all when there's or for Medicare for all against, insurance companies when there's a candidate there. How dare you raise your voice? You guys are being mean. You guys are toxic. How do you feel progressives right now when people are dying without their insulin, when people can't pay their rent, when they're living in their cars, when they are, just mentally exhausted in dealing with this capitalist oligarchy? How do you think we should be dealing with this? Do you think progressives are being too tough?
Absolutely not. And I think it's just self-serving. The attacks on Bernie supporters have really ramped up yesterday and today. And I think that, they see Bernie rising and they're just trying to take him down. And the whole civility squad is just ludicrous. These people who have six-figure jobs as pundits who were atrociously wrong in 2016, and yet they haven't been fired, are now talking about how, we're so mean, so rude, all of that. Like, talk to me about mean and rude when you can't afford your insulin, or you can't afford your rent, or somebody. I have a friend who had a heart attack because he's a diabetic and he went without insulin for years because he was in that gap with the ACA where, he made too much and too little, and so he couldn't afford it. And he had a massive heart attack and had to have a triple bypass surgery. And his surgeon told him, the reason you had this is because you were not on insulin. And so, that's rude. That's vicious. The system doing it to us. And these people, no, it's absolutely, we're not being too tough, number one. And number two, it's politics, and it's not too tough to point out policy differences between people. And I see that the way the progressive movement welcomes people who change their minds. Peter Dow, Leela Dow, they've become beloved by a lot of people on the left. I work with them. Their conversion is real. And most people have welcomed them on the left. And so I just did these talks about civility and you're being mean and, oh my gosh, all these snake emojis about Elizabeth Warren, how terrible, like whatever, people can't afford their rent and they're dying on the streets. It's such BS.
Well, the steak emojis, they can blame Rick and Morty for that one. That's not our fault. We just followed through. Who would you like to see be the next Speaker of the House?
Oh, I haven't actually thought about that one, but I think Pramila Jayapal. Obviously, I love AOC. I think that having somebody who's really progressive and has been there for a long time, so they know how to, work the relationships and all of that. Maybe Pramila Jayapal or Barbara Lee, somebody like that.
That's a good question. That would be my choice, Barbara Lee.
You say that.
So what is there any election integrity bills out there that are catching your eye, or do you believe we should have them? Because we just saw the superdelegate the nominees for these committees by the DNC, including Podesta, including many people that really despise Bernie Sanders, like Bakari Sellers, our friend on Twitter. He's my BFF. But it's just, it's kind of ridiculous. Nina Turner spoke out against it. Don't you think we should have more effective means to ensure that our elections are actually by and for the people?
I do, and I think it should be a direct democracy. I don't think we need these intermediaries between our vote and the results, like the Electoral College, like the delegates, all these layers that the Democratic Party has. I think it should be one vote, and that is, that is what happens. You don't have all these middlemen in between. And there are other election reforms that I would love to have. Seattle has a democracy vouchers program where every voter in the city, or every eligible voter in the city, gets, I think it's $200, and they can give it to their candidate or candidates of choice. And Sean Scott, who was a Democratic Socialist running for city council, if I'm correct, he got the number 1 or number 2, most democracy vouchers from people, because his policies were most about helping people, and turnout in that election went up. And I think there's a direct correlation, because when people feel some investment, and then it's like, oh, I have $200 to spend, I'm going to look up the candidates, research them, I'm going to then spend my money, there's more of an investment, and then they actually turn out to vote. And so I think that would be a phenomenal reform, to just give everybody in the country democracy vouchers to give to their candidates.
Do you think that YouTube should have deplatformed Alex Jones?
I don't know about that. I don't follow him very closely. I'm not familiar with the case. Did that happen recently?
About a year ago.
Well, basically, he's a right-wing, well-known, almost conspiracy theorist, I would say. But YouTube deplatformed him, and then they went on to deplatform a bunch of leftist channels. And a lot of people, especially on the left, were very much pro deplatforming him. But for instance, my opinion was, as much as I disagree with everything he's saying, when you deplatform someone, it's like Kamala Harris calling for...
That's the way I was going to say. What about Kamala Harris calling to remove Donald Trump's Twitter account? Do you believe that's okay?
No. Yeah, and I'm familiar, I know of Alex Jones. I wasn't familiar with that. I think it's tricky. I mean, if there's hate speech involved, maybe that's one thing. But if it's just, conspiracy theories, no. Because I think, for me as a progressive candidate, all the progressive YouTube shows that are out there have been a huge boon for my campaign. It's how a lot of people have gotten to know me. And so if we're expressing views that are unpopular, and let's say in the future, YouTube or Twitter, whoever, is owned by, a right-wing tech bro, which, there are plenty of them, would they then start deplatforming these shows? It's kind of I really don't agree with that. And I thought the whole Kamala Harris thing was ridiculous. Take Donald Trump off Twitter. I mean, no. And it was also such an odd thing for her to spend debate time on.
True.
Yeah, well, to try to press Elizabeth Warren, I think she asked her 3 times, will you call for removing Donald Trump's Twitter? Elizabeth Warren, come with me on this. We even asked her that, and she said yes unequivocally. So she doesn't care about our First Amendment rights. Fam?
So regarding that, what do you think what's happening with Glenn Greenwald? And do you think Julian Assange deserves the same sort of protections?
I think it's atrocious what's happening to Glenn Greenwald. I mean, he's uncovered such huge abuses by the government in Brazil. And, this is by the leader of Brazil, who's talked favorably about the dictatorship. He said, I think something like, if his son was gay, he would put him out on the street or beat him or something like that. And myself as an LGBTQ candidate, when I see stuff like that, it's very concerning to me, because, Brazil had made a lot of progress on LGBTQ rights, but for myself, yes, I'm glad we got gay marriage, but it feels to me like any right that is given to us can also be taken away. And so when I see those things happening, it makes me very concerned. And Glenn Greenwald has exposed huge abuses by the government, and he should not be threatened with these legal ramifications for it. And I also do not believe that Julian Assange should be treated the way he is. I think they're both being mistreated.
As pertaining to the president, do you think that any blue will do?
No. I will vote for whoever the Democratic nominee is.
Joe Biden?
But I think he's better than Donald Trump, but I wouldn't be happy about it. But I think the any blue will do thing is just a cudgel. The fact is that more Bernie people voted for Clinton than Hillary people voted for Obama. Yeah. And it's just a made up myth that they used to cudgel us with. And yeah, I want Trump out, but this is a primary. It's the time to be talking about what we want, not what we can't have.
Yeah, that's true. Just, I guess, overall, what is the one issue that day one you would make it your focus once you get in there, right away, push legislation to make it happen?
The Green New Deal, because of the existential threat it poses. If we don't take care of this, then a lot of the other stuff becomes moot. If it continues at this pace, I think that we could have a situation where we have millions or billions of climate refugees and the rich people just living on gated islands, while the rest of us fight it out and try to make do. And I think, unfortunately, many rich people would probably be fine with that. And so I think we need to take immediate action, decisive, large global action on this, particularly since, the emissions from America have contributed so much to it. Yet it's the developing world, the global south, and then the poor parts of America that are bearing the brunt of it. So it would be the Green New Deal. Another issue I'm really passionate about is housing. I believe we should have national universal rent control and massive investment in social housing.
Yeah. Rebecca, I got to say, well, Johnny's got a question. Go ahead. I'll finish up. Oh, would you, should I do it the way I asked her, or just which way you want it? Okay, so would you abolish ICE or would you abolish the CIA if you can only abolish one?
ICE.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah, we have one of the country's largest private immigration prisons in Tacoma. Yeah. It's run by Geo Group, and a group called the Northwest Detention Center Resistance has been fighting against it for years. That group is co-led by people who are detained inside the prison. So if anybody's interested in taking action, check them out, La Resistencia.
Yeah. Well, I am definitely abolish the CIA, but I'm not going to hold that against you, Rebecca. I think you're a great candidate. I looked at your page, brand new Congress. I would say definitely add foreign policy to your issue spot. You got one little spot down there, but I didn't know you went down to Guatemala, and I think that's really, really important. Yeah. And you said some stuff that really resonates for people like myself who are so into foreign policy, that we have caused the problem, and you have a great insight to that. So I would encourage you to add that to your issues page, because that is something that I really think is great that have a lot of knowledge about, and it will really help you in your run for Congress. Do you have anything else?
Thank you.
Johnny, did you have a question?
Yeah. Any questions from me? So tell us, everybody, where they can find you out there, give you a few bucks, help you out with this campaign, and more importantly, when your primary date is.
Yes.
My primary is in August, and I don't take any corporate money, no lobbyist money, corporate lobbyist money, so I can use all the donations I can get. You can go to RebeccaForWA.com/donate. That's RebeccaForWA. And that's also Rebecca for WA. That's my handle on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. So check me out on those platforms if you want to.
And just before we go, you're with Brand New Congress. Any other affiliations that have endorsed you or have worked with you?
I have been endorsed by both DSA chapters in my district, and just this past weekend, I was endorsed by Our Revolution National.
Oh, that's awesome. Amazing.
That's awesome.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, good luck on your run. Take that man down. You know what I'm saying? We're rooting for you here.
Yeah.
And when you, the primary is a Democratic primary only, right? So it's just, you got to finish, or is it the jungle primary? How does it work there?
It's a jungle primary like California.
Okay.
Good,
awesome.
Good. Do you have any other people other than your the incumbent running that you're going against too as well? You don't have to mention their names, but,
No other Democrats or progressives. There's one Republican who's jumped in, so currently it's 3 people.
Okay.
Well, good luck. Go get him, Rebecca.
Luck. Yeah.
Thank you.
We're all with you. Thank you so much for running.
Rebecca Parsons running for Congress in Washington. For Pasta Jardula.
Fiorella Isabel.
Johnny Sue on the ones and twos. We'll be back with Maria Estrada next. Thank you.
Convo out.